of the first sample evince genetic risk. Well, that's a lot of people. So what happens if we look at another gene? Let's pick one. Let's say DRD4, which operates on another neurotransmitter system. And what if we find out that 40% of people are at genetic risk for substance use? Well, then which gene do we pick? And the frequencies are pretty high. So what do we do? And there are some people who would advocate. I have actually spoken at one of the NIH institutes, and there were people there who were very serious about, let's do genetic screening and let's save a lot of money and get people into prevention programs. Well, the data indicate pretty clearly that people don't like to be stigmatized. So the idea that people are going to submit to genetic testing and then participate and then bring their children and themselves to a prevention program is the likelihood of that is pretty low. Secondarily, we're dealing with a population that is experiencing, I think it would be fair to say, a fair amount of racial discrimination. So should we add some genetic discrimination to that? I don't think so. So my own stance on this is by doing universal preventative interventions, you're going to get a lot of people under an umbrella who are at risk for a variety of things and get them involved in a prevention programming, which I think is going to benefit the community at large. And also, one final thing. Do you all know what the most successful public health intervention in the United States is? Any guesses? Seatbelts. Now, why don't we just mandate, I mean really, why don't we just mandate seatbelt use for people who are at highest risk? So why don't we just mandate seatbelt use for teenagers? Well, the reason is other people benefit from using seatbelts. But from an actuarial point of view, we should just have teenagers use seatbelts. I would argue, I think lots of people can benefit from an inoculation of competence-promoting parenting. I think a lot of youth can benefit from an inoculation of skills that allow them to be very self-regulated. So I appreciate your question. Yes?
You mentioned earlier that you had problems in the community as well as in the program, getting this kind of work done. Can you talk a bit more about your community partnerships and how they can sustain and develop that? Sure.
Question was about the development and sustainability of community partnerships.
Well, as I said briefly, the community partnerships began in 1987. And I also said that it was obvious, no matter who you were at the University of Georgia, no matter who you were, if you go out into rural African American communities, you're still part of the University of Georgia. And you are still not like me if you're a community member. So back in 1987, we began to identify, we only worked in a few counties at that point. Now we're in 32 counties. And we develop relationships. And today what we do is we have protocols for training community liaisons to become our partners. We just don't leave it to fiat. But we have certain expectations, and the community members have certain expectations. And so we have a training about, well, how do we work together? What's the compensation? What are our roles? And it's just something that we kind of have packaged over time, and we also revise over time because we're always learning how to do what we do better. But we couldn't do this. We couldn't have come up with a protocol for collecting DNA without the input from the community.
With that, I want to introduce Dr. Murray, who's the Betts Chair at the Peabody College at Vanderbilt University. And one of the reasons Drs. Brody and Murray were nominated for this particular lecture series relates to the entire title of the series, which is around innovation, insight, and impact. So Dr. Murray is going to present to you about her work or their work on reducing barriers to risk preventive intervention programs for rural African American families via an e-learning interactive delivery model. And one of the issues that we often hear about is access to technology and so forth in poorer communities and in rural communities. So I'll invite Dr. Murray now to come up and give her presentation.
Can you see that very well from where you are? You can? No. Yes, no. A little bit of lights. And I was forewarned that this background would be too light. My dear husband says that to me. Gene knows him well enough to know that he's a great critic and a great supporter. Dr. Ordine Gonzalez mentioned that I'm going to talk about an innovative aspect of the work that Gene and I started when I was at the University of Georgia. And so it's really a spin-off of the work that we have been doing with the program that you were able to see the promo video called the Strong African American Families Program. And the program's modification of that is called the Pathways for African American Success. The work is supported, of course, by have to acknowledge the people that's investing in the work that I'm doing here. So I'm going to talk first about one of the lessons learned in the delivery of the SAFE program, focusing specifically on those families who were at greatest need, which then required us to really begin to think seriously about issues of access. And then the evidence of how the program facilitated positive outcomes for the families in greatest needs, and the various barriers that we were able to identify that explain why these families were having difficulty attending the sessions, both at the individual and the community level, which then began to send the wheels turning about how might we enhance our ability to deliver this very efficacious and sustainable program through a much more advanced use of technology in the work that we're doing as a mechanism for reducing the barriers. And then in beginning to think about delivering a program like this to rural families, one of the questions would be how feasible is it to think about transporting technology, family-based delivering modality to these families because of the digital divide that we all have heard about, particularly with regard to African American and Caucasian, and more importantly about rural communities. So I'm going to provide a case study of the process that we have engaged in thus far to move this program into technology transfer, and then ways that we've begun to utilize the infusion of technology in the way that we not only identify the clusters of where our families are whom we've randomly assigned to these conditions, but also various kinds of resources in the community that will inform us about how to set up a community infrastructure that takes away a lot of the resources garnered by driving in communities trying to find these locations through the use of geomapping. Okay, so one of the things that that we were very proud of with regard to the SAFE program. And Jean described these 7 sessions that these families attended. 65% of our families in Georgia attend 5 or more of the sessions. That's well beyond what most people report as it relates to the delivery and engagements of families in preventive